Hey, welcome everybody. My name is John Boyle and I'm president of the Dulles Regional Chamber of Commerce. And it's an honor to be here today to talk about an important issue on substance abuse. Several months ago, we got together in the chamber after some recent national incidents and recognized that we can't just sit here and look at other people and say, look at the problems they have. We got to look at ourselves. And so we brought together some experts and said, what are we going to do? And we created a series called Coffee and Conversations. And we talked about how to deal with mental illness, looking at the youth, how to have conversations with youth. Substance abuse is another one that we wanted to bring up. And all this will lead to our October 4th luncheon, where we're going to talk about being trauma informed, which is really critical to folks. There's some new regulations that are going to be in place, but you want to have a caring, open, and helpful workforce. You need to be aware of all these things and all the different services that are available to you. So our chamber, well, people hear about a chamber of commerce, they think business. The fact is it's more than business, right? It's about community, it's about not-for-profits. And core to that is our healthcare providers. And we just ran a workforce event where we talked about techs and trades and STEM. And right in the middle of that was a discussion about healthcare. The healthcare workforce, how important it is. What are we doing in particular for mental health, mental illness, mental wellness? We need to have professionals, and there's a real dearth of folks right now where we need to get more. But we're lucky to have some folks today from Stone Springs Hospital and Dominion Hospital and talking about what our expertise is in this area. And Dr. Nixon's with us. She's led a number of our groups. Suzanne Kelly's on our board of directors, and she helped put this together. And I just want to thank the two of them publicly, and because they recognize how important this is. So really excited about our event today. And if you caught us as we did our lead up, we're going to record this, and it's because we can share this with other people. And sometimes it's difficult. I'm sure we'll talk about having these conversations, and maybe you can share the slides, right? Share this discussion when Zach's going to share with us. And so there's different ways to be able to get the word out, recognize that we got to address this. It doesn't go away. It doesn't get better by looking the other direction. So to start it off, I'd like to introduce Ashley Summers. Been a real big help to us on several of these coffee and conversations. And so it's a welcome back, Ashley. So over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's an honor to introduce our presenter. But first, my name is Ashley Summers. I'm the Director of Physician and Provider Relations for Dominion Hospital and Stone Springs Hospital Center Behavioral Health Unit. It's such a privilege to work side by side with Zach. So I think you'll find his presentation very helpful and useful for you today. So without further ado, I do want to just give you a little bit of information about our presenter, Zachary Shifflett. He is a graduate of the College of William and Mary with a master's in clinical mental health counseling, with experience serving very diverse populations with co-occurring disorders, including children, adolescents, adults, in various settings. Zach works directly with every specialty unit within the hospital here at Dominion, including Dominion Hospital's trauma and eating disorder unit. Zach is also part of a private practice where he treats adolescents with various co-occurring substance use and mental health needs. Zach approaches all patients through a lens of reducing shame and guilt, learning more about the self, and teaching skills that help empower individuals to become their ideal selves. When he isn't doing therapy, Zach enjoys exercising, boating, playing guitar, drums, reading, fishing, traveling, and live music. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Zach.
Thank you. Throw golf in there too if anyone wants to take it. So I'm going to cover lightly some stuff here. This is a pretty considerable passion of mine. And I'm going to talk about both the resources, what co-occurring disorders are, why that even matters, why it's a significant problem in substance use, and kind of what we can do as a community, both individually and as a whole, and maybe some of our blind spots and areas of need, because sometimes it's helpful to know what you don't know or our gaps. So let's make sure everything's working. Perfect. So what are co-occurring disorders? This is something we throw around a lot. The older term was dual diagnosis, but we sort of stepped away from that a little bit because you don't necessarily need a diagnosis to have a co-occurring status. Full diagnosis, I don't always think is necessary, but predominantly this term is used in substance use. The co-occurring can be any mental health disorder that coincides with another mental health disorder. It just tends to predominantly show up as substance use disorders. So what we're seeing now, and finding good research on this is difficult because we're going to get a lot of different responses, but 60 to 80% of individuals tend to have a co-occurring disorder. We can have up to 95%. So what this means is that anyone who qualifies for some form of substance misuse has another form of mental health diagnosis. And if we're trying to approach substance use as a crisis, especially now, it's really important that we acknowledge that this is happening. So there are a common set of co-occurring disorders that we see. I can tell you the most prevalent ones, we'll get into that. But the important thing to know is that predominantly people who are struggling with substance misuse also have another mental health diagnosis that would be needed and to be addressed in treatment. So this is the most common ones. I'll tell you the ones I see the most in the hospital setting when I'm treating co-occurring, and how we can sort of start addressing these issues in various settings. So the most common disorders are generalized anxiety disorders, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, and mood disorders. Mood disorders would be depression, or generally in those things that just affect the mood. Post-traumatic stress disorder, so these would be our trauma disorders. Personality disorders, which is various population to treat with different sorts of challenges. Predominantly what we see there is individuals with antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorders, schizophrenia, and ADHD. What we're seeing a lot of, particularly in the hospital setting, is anxiety, bipolar, trauma, schizophrenia, ADHD being our really major ones. If I'm in a setting where I'm treating someone outpatient, it's very likely, especially if it's a young man, which would be most of the adolescents I treat, that individual is struggling with ADHD or anxiety, as well as having some sort of substance misuse. So why this is important is because a lot of our current approach now is that, let's say someone says you have a drinking problem. Well, then we're going to address the drinking problem. So you might send someone in a community setting to AA. Let's just focus on the drinking. Let's go to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a free program. It's a wonderful program for individuals trying to get sober, if that's their goal. And they'll really, really hone in on just the drinking. That model presents that if I am drinking, things are going bad. And if I'm not drinking, things are going well. And for a lot of individuals, that can be true. But lately, things have changed. Particularly the last 20 years, we're seeing a pretty significant uptick in the presentation of depression, anxiety, or trauma being a primary concern of those who are trying to get sober or manage their substance use. So if someone is really struggling and we're like, it's the drinking, it's the drinking, it's the drinking, or it's the drugging, it's the drugging, and they get sober and things aren't getting better. And now we've got suddenly someone who thinks it's not worth it. And, why not drink if you're struggling? I got sober. Everyone said this was going to be, the help that I was looking for. Particularly, we're looking at opiates, right? I got sober. Why am I not feeling better? And if that's consistently your problem, you're going to find people who don't even want to attempt, people who get sober and find it's not worth it, frequent, regular relapses, and from that, worsening shame. And we as therapists as well also have this problem. So a lot of people will just focus on the mental health. And the second someone brings up substances, there's a panic. And whoa, you need to talk to someone who specializes in that. I don't know anything about drugs. That's a no-no. Or conversely, we might have someone in substance use treatment just really honing in on sobriety strategies and just only hitting that. And someone brings up trauma, and that therapist panics. Nope, I'm not a trauma therapist. You got to take that to someone else. I'm just here to help you get sober. So a lot of people are in the spinning wheel of missing help. And what we're seeing now is the research is really trying to drive home. Treat both at once. You have to be successful at treating all of the problems at the same time. You can manage the trauma, but if you're drinking every day, you're going to numb out. Or if you're still drinking every day, it's hard to work on your mental health. You've got to do both at the same time. This is the foundation of co-occurring disorders. So we have this inherently large gap in treatment because our old models were very much divided. It's just substance use or it's just mental health. These are split instead of being joined because substance use is mental health. So when we're looking at managing or helping people as a community, we've got some options. And I'll speak to those a little bit later in a couple slides, but even identifying co-occurring disorders is not something people are used to. If you have a family who's struggling, any coworkers, peers, employees who struggle with substance use, would you know to look for mental health crises as well? And when you're trying to get people to get help, it's always important that we get them the best help that meets those needs. So how would we identify it? And part of that's on us as a community, not mental health experts. As a whole, that's a very challenging thing to see. But always keeping open the idea of, like, if someone's had a rough time in childhood, they've mentioned it in passing, a dad who was hard on them. Any sort of small things they've said, all right, well, now you've opened the door that this person may have some significant trauma that is really, really reinforcing the substance use problem. I'll take it a step further and say, if someone has been in a sustained addiction for a long time, by the nature of being an addiction is inherently traumatic and shame-inducing. A lot of secrets, a lot of hiding things. So even if you started your addiction without mental health concerns, it's very likely you develop some through the course of that addiction. Again, some studies will say up to 95%. I'll say here, 80% of people I treat have co-occurring trauma as part of their substance misuse, and identify trauma, intrusive memories, and responses as being one of their major triggers of drinking. So if you get someone sober, they're still going to be so distressed that it's just unmanageable. So I have found if we manage those symptoms, cravings are gone. Something I say a lot in treatment, especially for people who's been through treatment a lot, which is, you know how to not use. Eventually you do. That's the easy part, is to not use. What's much harder is not wanting to use. And you can teach all the strategies to avoid use, but what we really want to do is try to reduce someone's desire to use. And if that's triggered from mental health concerns, that needs to be the approach that we take so that we're treating people where they're at and they feel like their quality of life is improving. So how do we offer support? And I'm going to make some broader suggestions of how we can interact with individuals who are struggling. This is based off my work, what I really find to be the most successful people. And this is not hard and fast rules. This is not some perfect truth. Therapy and treatment is very challenging and it's unique, and everyone has their own unique approaches. This one is just mine. I've found one of the major causes of relapse is shame. Shame in this context is a feeling bad about who you are as a person. In therapy, we talk about the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is for something you've done. Shame is about who you are as a person. And if there's a lot of shame in society about struggling with addiction, people will internalize that. And there's a big difference between I'm struggling with something and I'm struggling with who I am as a person. Then it becomes internal. And that's what we want to avoid. How we talk about addiction as a whole really matters, because a lot of people don't appreciate that it's not really a choice. For a lot of people, they would dream of a world where they were not addicted to something or dependent on something. So it's up to us as a whole to try to reduce shame as a whole, so getting help. If you have a relapse, how bad does it get? Can someone have a small relapse and get help again, or do they just internalize who they are? That's the problem. The way that we as a community talk about addiction really, really matters, because that sets a tone for how people relate to others. I'm struggling. It's embarrassing. I'm a bad person. You hide it, internalize, don't talk about it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. Hope is something we have to offer people. And part of doing that is, I'm a big fan of open workplace communications. There are some really challenging ideas in a lot of workplaces that most after parties cares. And I could ask here with a lot of business owners, how many company events happen at a bar, have alcohol at them? It's a very big part of our culture to have drinking in it. I'm speaking just to drinking as a whole. It's kind of the same idea that substances play a large role in our lives. Having communications about that openly is very valuable to reduce our idea about the role that alcohol and drugs play in people's lives. So I would strongly recommend a handful of things. No blaming. Blaming is a big part of shaming. Pointing fingers. I'll give a good example that I give for a lot of people. I think I get a little bit more into in the next slide is making personal change is very hard, very, very hard. And there are very, very limited resources for people who are struggling with co-occurring disorders. So a lot of people can't even access that help, couldn't afford it, or there are very few people who are offering it. And particularly for adolescents. So we have to find ways to support our other groups, projects, nonprofits, things that are free, easy access resources for people and make them known and available. If we're talking about them and open about them, we start removing some of that fear and some of that something's wrong with me, shame, and make it easier for someone to approach, seek out things. So mental health support groups is actually one of the things I find to be very limited around here. You can find an AA meeting or Narcotics Anonymous meeting or other 12-step meetings pretty easily. Finding a mental health support group is hard. It's very hard. NAMI has mental health support groups and connection groups. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I think those may not be in person again yet, though. So they can have some of those, I believe, Zoom meetings once a week, getting people connected to others. That's a very valuable resource. But thinking of us as a whole in the community, I'll get to what some of my other suggestions are. Introducing the idea of support networks that aren't just about addiction, but instead about other challenges that we're seeing. Support groups for depression, support groups for trauma, and support groups for social anxiety, which I realize sounds like it's a bit of irony, but can be very helpful. Why this matters is this social connection and feeling understood component of addiction and mental illness. I don't have a link to the study here, but a recent study came out really highlighting the isolation of our current population. And this is aside from co-occurring disorders. I believe they said the average adult reports having 1 to 0 close friends, compared to 20 years ago where they would say 2, and I believe before that it was 2 or 3. So we're having this very isolated society where people aren't as close. This is a problem because when you isolate, shame goes up, social connection goes down, and you'll start feeling like no one gets you. People don't understand you. People are going to judge you. I hear quotes a lot from people like, if you just knew the real me, no one would like me. Start really internalizing the things that are wrong with yourself. So this is especially coming out of the pandemic, which is inherently very isolating. So my suggestions for the community are reestablishing our activities, our sober activities to foster connection. There's a lot of power in being connected to others, and even more in that feel like they get you and wouldn't judge you. The last thing you want to tell someone is came to them and said, hey, I'm really struggling with, let's say, opiate addiction. I've had chronic pain in my life, and I'm addicted to pills. I don't even want to be on them. Imagine if you tell someone that. This is a very humbling thing to share, and their gut reactions. Well, why would you choose that over your kids? I don't understand. What do you think the odds are that person never opens up again? Right? Very, very little. And I hear this over and over again. Or, let's throw in a mental health part of that. Now you're depressed and you don't want to leave your house. You go out, have a social engagement, and someone calls you out on it. Where have you been? You seem like you're drinking a lot here. You have social anxiety. And just boom, that shame digs in. What do you think the odds are that person comes out for another social gathering? So I would really encourage our business owners, especially who are doing events for employees, larger events for the community. What are our sober events that can help people connect? These activities that get people reconnected and get ahead of this worsening isolation that I've already seen from the pandemic. I think, again, I'll say, can we tell is a huge part of this. And with so few resources, we have this sort of back and forth problem of, people just see addiction, do a quick assessment. There's no one really doing co-occurring treatments. And now this person is set up in a bogged down system that's just going to run through them. And they'll come through and say things to me like, I really feel like it's my trauma holding me back because I have all these memories, these flashbacks. And I just don't, treated everything else and nothing seems to help. It really feels like it's the trauma. Or, I just get so hard on myself. I talk to myself so negatively. My depression is so bad. All I want to do is not think or feel this way. So why wouldn't I smoke weed every day? I said, it makes plenty of sense to me. The stigma of the addiction component and the lack of the connection resources can really make these things worse because it feels like we trap people into these dichotomies, which is you're sober or you're not. Instead of let's do symptom reduction, what we would call harm reduction. Really, really trying to focus on just getting someone to feel good enough that stopping use is worth it. That's a major challenge, but that's what we really focus on in a lot of my practice work at the hospital. It's about that as well. Again, I know I repeat this, but you have to make people feel like it's worth it. it has to feel worth it. And if it's not immediately rewarding, people will write it off. No one's going to do it. It's not going to seem valuable. And then you're going to get caught in that guilt shame cycle. And the more and more that stacks up, the harder it is to dig yourself under or out from under. So why I talk so much about that shame part for recovery is, this will drive this home again, making personal lifestyle changes is exceptionally difficult. And a lot of people are lucky that they don't actually ever have to. But I have a good set of examples for people about stuff that we, big air quotes here, should be doing. Because I hear a lot of people tell my patients, they shouldn't be drinking. They should be doing this. And I would ask anybody, all right, well, we all should be exercising, right? That's easy. We should be eating healthier. I just have Chick-fil-A. But, why did 90% of people fail when they join a gym? Making lifestyle changes is really, really difficult. And this is what is demanded in recovery for a lot of people, is a huge, full lifestyle change. Now, imagine you were going to the gym, trying to exercise, you want to move your body, just get a little bit more in touch with your body and exercise, and you miss a couple of days. And the first thing someone does is say, I knew it. I knew you'd quit. You think that's going to help? Absolutely not. In fact, it will shut you down faster than anything. This is the same way we approach substance use. Someone has a slip up and they share it with you. Thank God. You have a chance to intervene, tell them it's okay. A mistake isn't the end of things. Change is difficult. This sort of cultural shame we have around it, exactly what I'm talking about. Internal, the person puts up themselves, or external, and stack that on top of everything else that they're feeling, if it's co-occurring or not, people just tend to feel really negatively about themselves. Maybe they're not changing fast enough, or they've made mistakes when they do try to change because it doesn't look pretty when they do. So as a whole, you have to help people. Something I tell others a lot is the care from arm's length, right? So you don't want to get too wrapped up in someone else's sobriety, because when they start making mistakes, that's going to wear on you. And you also don't want to be cold, because that's going to have the shame. This is a very challenging dance with someone, right? There are symptoms of addiction that are not pretty. This is a reality. But we have to love from a distance so that we can be the most supportive to our peers, partners, coworkers, employees, what have you. It is someone's journey. If they invite you, talk to it about it, good, engage, cheer for them. If they challenge, or challenged with it, or struggling, encourage, or hope. Don't get wrapped up in it. It's not your recovery. It's theirs. And if you can't do it for somebody, it's like if you did a child's homework, right? Or anything. They got a good grade at the beginning, but eventually they got to do it on their own. So we love from a distance, offer support from a distance. Sometimes people need it. We have to be very careful about how over-involved we get. Keep a good, healthy balance with people who are having that challenge. For instance, if you had someone who was struggling, a gentle suggestion, if they were in like 12-step programs, hey, you're going to a meeting today. You had a really stressful day. Do you want to go? I can take you. In AA programs, they have sponsors. You called your sponsor, call sober friends. What are you doing after this? Do you need some company? You look like you're having a hard day. I'm happy to sit with you. Offering that kind of support is simple, easy stuff. And things for a day at a time can change someone's life. But you can't do it for them. It's just finding those small ways that you can see people struggling, offer a gentle hand. Don't come in and be like, you're going to drink today? Is that going to be it? Don't relapse. It's a little too much. Just gentle stuff. I think a valuable thing that I would say for anybody who's mental health, substance use, or just trying to make changes in her own life, there's a sort of illusion of choice. And this is a valuable thing to know when conceptualizing our own lives and others, that if people could choose not to be addicted to things, surely they would. Absolutely. That's an easy choice. I had a man once tell me he drank the fun out of drinking. I will never forget that. Still continued. And it just wasn't a choice for him anymore. So why this gets into a bigger issue is, let's say you've been struggling with trauma responses, and a cannabis use disorder. This would be a very common occurrence that I see a lot. And you're trying to stop. You have a panic attack, a trauma response, you're overwhelmed, you smoke. It happens. Then you come to me the next day and you tell me, I don't know why I would do that. I don't know why I would choose to do that. And I would tell you exactly this. It wasn't a choice. The right circumstances, people will just act naturally with what comes to them. If you have a traumatic response, you're going to do your learned behaviors. And then you're going to, through hindsight, convince yourself that you're just making bad choices. And if you tell yourself that you're making bad choices, then you're going to start convincing yourself that you're a bad person as a whole, instead of realizing that a lot of the things we do are not active choices. We have to drive this home for everybody because it is such a huge part of guilt and shame. The choices we make from our mental health and co-occurring substance use, in hindsight, might seem like a choice, but they're symptoms. These are symptoms of the mental illness or the substance use. When we're well, they're not there. And if people think that it's who they are, here comes the shame, here comes the guilt, and it's just going to dig further and further into that hole. Self-forgiveness is a part of that. Now, does it absolve somebody of the things they've done? No. I will periodically pop in and do some work in the jail and remind them of that as well. We still did it. We're still responsible for what happened. But it is a symptom of your mental illness or the disease of addiction, not who you are. So you think it's who you are, but let it be who you are, and change is impossible. So how do we elicit choice from people is encouraging them to be present, conscious of their decisions in the moment. If we're slowed down, not wrapped up in our heads, take a pause, make a choice, and through that we have options to make change. If we are panicked, we're numbing out, or intense responses, we're going to do what comes naturally. We'll be in autopilot mode. And then we're going to look back and pretend we had a choice and beat ourselves up for it. So it's always, for anyone who's making any change, important to be conscious and aware of yourself in the moment so that you have a choice, and to forgive yourself for the time you didn't really have one. So I'm going to give a few presentations of how stuff happens, and then I'll wrap up for some questions. So the most common one I see in adolescents is ADHD. I could have put anxiety and depression there, but I think ADHD is a much better one, because this is something we see a lot of is, again, young men with ADHD. Put some quotes on that because they hand that out with candy. But these individuals might struggle with impulsivity. You might find struggling in class, work. How does that turn into a co-occurring disorder? And why does knowing someone has ADHD, why is that so necessary for conceptualizing the treatment? Well, a lot of people with ADHD really struggle to maintain friends. You are impulsive, You might do things that are embarrassing and stuff. A lot of people are very isolated. Parents don't want kids with ADHD in their homes. I've seen a lot of presentations of this. So now we have a kid who's isolated, struggling with impulsive behaviors. And let's stack it another one. You're struggling in school. School is a kid's primary goal, right? Are you doing well in school? How's school going? Every question, the family that comes over, what are they going to ask about? School. Now you're struggling with it. And that is so linked to your self-esteem. So now we don't feel good about us. We have poor social connection. And all you want to do is feel a little better. And you're impulsive. So you get an option. Any sort of substance that makes you just feel a little better. But you felt bad for a long time. Or maybe you take something and it slows you down a little bit. Well, I can think straight. I'm as impulsive. Maybe people like being around me a little more. But now it starts getting out of hand. And if we can't learn to regulate or manage the ADHD symptoms, we're just going to keep falling into the same trap. So you have to approach both. Otherwise, drugs will be the natural option. It's a matter of time for a lot of kids where you cross paths with it. Experimentation is a normal part of youth. We'll say the same with depression. Consistently having depression, you slowly isolate. So you're going into a major depressive episode. And now what comes with that? I'm failing all my responsibilities. Negative self-talk, general exhaustion, and something we call anhedonia. So a loss of enjoyment of things that you used to enjoy. And that's so painful. All you have to do is just throw just a tiny bit of substance into that. And suddenly it feels like there's some brief symptom reduction. People wouldn't use drugs if they didn't work, right? If you did it and you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. I will never do this again. Awful experience. Why would you ever use it, right? They work. They really work in the front end. They fall off quickly. But in that front end, for people who are trying to manage some of their mental health symptoms, drugs are immediately appealing. The number of people I've heard say, well, if I didn't have weed, I would have killed myself a long time ago. It's staggering. It's a really, really common statement to me. So it'll show up in a lot of different ways because in that front end, substance is really, really effective for people at getting some sort of response to managing their mental illness symptoms. And depression is a great example of that. I just felt good for the first time, and I just never do. And with time, it makes the symptoms worse. But on that front end, it works. I drag it out, it slowly stops working. Another great one for this is eating disorder behavior. It's a good example of something that works a little differently. Sometimes people will have a lot of anxiety around mealtime, a lot, and they don't want to eat at all. Oh, so I just smoked a little bit of weed to stimulate my appetite. I get so anxious. I can turn into a binge eating disorder quickly. Or you never really learn the skills to manage engaging with food without anxiety. Being high all the time is just not really an option. What do you got to do if you have to eat in front of other people? You can't walk out of your work day and smoke. It's not an option. Then it might start creeping into that work day. Then it gets out of hand. Now we have an eating disorder and a dependence as well. And finally, the one I see the absolute most of is PTSD or trauma. And what we're getting a lot of with this is significant traumatic responses and people wanting a few things. We either want to numb out, really numb out, or sometimes you're so numb all the time, all you want to do is finally feel something. People might drink to feel. A lot of people say they drink to numb. I find that people who drink tend to get more emotional, can actually say the things they wanted to say the whole time to how bad, cry, break down some of those numbing barriers. And you just always at a 10 or at a 0 until you start learning some of the skills to manage those traumatic symptoms. You're going to have this other presentation. You see it a lot with veterans as well, and a lot of circumstances where just that dysregulation, really good at numbing out, separating from feelings, and that's not sustainable. People want to and need to feel. So when we're approaching this to be the most effective, we have to treat both at the same time. Craving management. substance use knowledge, information, ways to avoid, strategies, some reality checks, support groups, people understand. Someone get why you would want to drink every day when other people just don't understand that it's not a choice. And then some of our gap work, that mental health connection. How can we help get people connected to mental health supports? How can we help get more people into therapy? Because there's a major need right now. And if that need is not met, how can we get more support groups going, get people connected to free resources, start initiating sober activities to get more social community connection, responsibility, feeling like you are part of your community. You want to get back to it. You're seen, heard, understood. So these are some of those challenges, but I would recommend to anybody, when we're really trying to help someone, the last thing we want to do is shame and blame. Want someone to feel like there's hope, even when they feel the most hopeless. So I am happy to field any questions you guys may have.
Zach, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm sitting here going, I mean, just the whole idea about the co-occurring disorders, right? I'm sure it's a term you use professionally, but for myself and folks in the chamber, it's a new concept, but it's one of those things, because you look at, like you said, just try to fix the problem, and just on a whole different scale. I used to play tennis with a guy who always had a problem with his knee, and finally went to the doctor. Authorities going to tell him to get a knee replacement. He goes, "Oh, I got to fix your hips," right? Because he had multiple things wrong. And so that's why you need a professional. And I wonder if you could just kind of share your thoughts on the internet, because back in the day, you go to a fun house, you look in a mirror, and it's kind of fun to see the distortion, what you look like. People are using the internet now, and it's coming back as a fun house mirror. It doesn't really reflect. They see things, they dive down, depending on which way they go, it could help or hurt them. Can you talk about the internet and how that might hurt people with the guilt and the shame issues?
Oh boy, yeah, right. So this is an interesting secondary component of, especially I'm going to go like TikTok and up. TikTok, particularly when I work with adolescents, is, let's rewind the clock 100 years. Rewind the clock 50 years. You might only know 50, 100 people in your town who, your high school, it's close. You know each other. And there's good, bad, everyone kind of feels a role in it. And now we have 7.8 billion people. You can see everybody. So you have this improbable continuous series of people who you're going to perceive as better than you. And it is endless. And people will not appreciate that a lot of it's fake, but just you have this massive vision of people with exceptional privilege who have so much more than you. And all you can do is compare yourself. One of my favorite quotes as well is that comparison is the thief of joy. And social media went from being connection to comparison, and serves as a major, major problem for people in a lot of ways. One, about like health information. I do a lot of substance use education. I always encourage people to ask me. I know a ton about drugs. If you have any questions, please do it, because of tons of misinformation. Tons of people you're going to see are just constantly doing better than you, right? People just feel like there's no space for them anymore. Why be mediocre? I'll never be this person. Even access to consistent news, and people who are afraid of the world feel like it's a dangerous place. First thing I tell them is, like, do you watch the news? Stop. You're going to drive yourself insane before you can't even leave your house anymore because you're so anxious. So it's just consistent access to an unfathomable amount of information. Individuals really feeding a lot of these co-occurring mental health disorders, or glamorizing them. The opposite effect.
So Zach, could you dwell for a second on the anxiety issue? We were part of an award-winning program called Westfield Cares for sophomores at Westfield High School. And it was typically year over year about drug abuse and awareness. And we injected, on the advice of some folks, a piece on anxiety. You could have heard a pin drop. There's a bunch of sophomores filled a ballroom at Westfield Marriott, and it was about anxiety. They were all full of anxiety, and they admitted it when they talked about how important it was. And in the video that they showed, they had the student that had some anxiety, and then the mom came on to talk about it, and she had anxiety. How much you talked about, eating healthy. Sometimes you'll see a nutritional issue becomes a family thing. Is that something that can be transferred? Is something that you need to look at that family unit? As you talked about having the news on all the time, maybe mom or dad has it or the kids are exposed to it. Can you talk about the importance of anxiety and pulling out and how to address that?
So actually, one of the best modalities of treatment for kids is full family therapy, and that'd be for substance use especially, because everybody's got their story. I like to tell people truth is a funny word. I'm not a detective. I'm not here to pull out the truth. But seeing that family interaction, how does your family talk about a problem? Where did you learn to cope? I might ask somebody, what's your first memory of learning to cope? This is a trap question. They don't have it, obviously. It's not something that, you think about. But where did you learn to cope? Your parents. It's the first people you see manage stress. And you're not even sure that you're learning that. You just watch it. And then that reinforced behaviors of like, if you don't do this, your life's over. I mean, I was born in the 90s, but the permanent record myth of like making a mistake and just how permanent our mistakes are. And now imagine you can film them and everything has recorded everything. And your mistakes may be played out. There are so many components of anxiety. When I treat it, can we manage the physical symptoms? Can we address the fact that this is fear? Where does your fear come from? Why are we afraid? And that might come back to that shaming. That might come back to some other things. Why are we afraid? Because anxiety is fear by another name. It's our attempt to control the future through present worry. And if I just worry enough about this, I can change this outcome of a very, very uncertain world. Parents might do it and reinforce it in kids as we attempt to control a lot of chaos. Just do this, do better in school, do that, do this, do that, do this. And everything will be controlled and be safe and okay. And all we're doing is reinforcing that present worry has some form of control over our future. So that's regularly how I work to conceptualize that with families and kids.
That's awesome. Thanks. Yeah, the whole family aspect, that's a great idea because it does take more. And thanks, Grace just shared in her chat about some of the issues. And sometimes one thing might be a spark to say, hey, I need to look at other areas as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashley in a second. The Chamber actually started a resource page because as we got all this information and fed it, it's like, oh, we want to share this and put it out. So literally on our homepage, we started a mental resource and we put a series of links, and we'll definitely have those. We've got links at Dominion Hospital with things that Ashley has shared before, but if some of those programs or reports that you like to post for us, be glad to have those up on our page. As people see that, they'll be able to find that information. And Ashley, I'll turn it over to you if you want to, any questions and kind of wrap up.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, John. Are there any more questions? I know we had one message in the chat relating with dual diagnosis. Whenever she tries to quit using, she's overwhelmed with anxiety and sadness, then starts hating the way she feels inside and can't sleep at all. Then she returns to using. I don't know, Zach, if you have any words on that, but
yeah,
that was.
I mean, certainly one of the major challenges as well with co-occurring disorders that I try to coach people through is something else you would call post-acute withdrawal symptoms, which are you have a withdrawal, the physical symptom withdrawal. And then after that, you have mental health. It's a chemical withdrawal from your brain as you're readjusting to what we call your baseline chemicals. So for the first 3-6 months of the year, people are going to see worsened mental health symptoms. Actually, it's generally considered best practice to not give someone a mental health diagnosis until they've had about a year of sobriety, because it takes time for the brain to heal. One of the challenges of that is if you have anxiety already, and now you're in a post-acute withdrawal phase, it's so overwhelming. You just want relief from that mental health symptom. I often have to encourage people that the severity isn't permanent. It will improve. And going through skills to manage the anxiety and some of that day-to-day dread, the physical symptoms that are so overwhelming, is such an important approach. Light nasal breathing exercises for panic attacks, cold water, gentle stuff that's very welcoming, and then strategies to challenge anxious thoughts. This is kind of a two-pronged approach because the physical symptoms are usually so overwhelming. You get sick. Anxiety and stomach problems are hand in hand. The number of people I've heard say they had IBS, just really had unmanaged trauma anxiety responses is remarkable. Learning those skills is such a necessary part of it because, again, it's got to be rewarding. You stop. Well, why would you stop? So that's a light answer without taking too much time, but I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Zach. I do think that's helpful. And your entire presentation has been just a wealth of knowledge, and you're always so wonderful to speak on topics like this and anxiety and other things. So I feel very lucky that I get to see you every day and be around you. But what I would encourage anyone who's watching now, I think that if you are in the Northern Virginia area or the DMV area, we're fortunate enough to have Dominion Hospital and a hospital like Stone Springs who both have behavioral health units. So I think there's a lot of communities that sadly don't have these resources available, but thankfully we do. So I certainly encourage you to contact us at Dominion Hospital or contact the behavioral health unit at Stone Springs Hospital. And we are always happy to engage in a conversation, whether it's about you or your loved one, so that way we can help in any way possible that we can. So I thank you all so much for your time today, and thank you, John and Chris and Suzanne Kelly and the entire Dulles Chamber of Commerce for really making this event happen. I hope to see more events like this in the future because part of us is we all need to serve our community, and this is certainly a great way to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was a long process to get the diagnosis. We still don't know exactly what type of dementia it is.
Nobody was surprised, but we both felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders because we didn't have to pretend anymore that everything was okay, because we all knew it wasn't.
Getting to a point where we couldn't leave home all the time alone. She was still pretty mobile and still pretty active, but it just didn't feel comfortable.
The saddest thing to me at this point is how a relationship under these circumstances goes from companionship to caregiving. And that is such a loss. You have to live with that one every day.
Being a spouse of somebody with dementia is very, very lonely. Very lonely. Because you have this partner you've shared, everything with your whole life, and now you can't even talk about what you're going to do tomorrow.
So when we first got this diagnosis, I was all about, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle it? How am I going to adapt?
But it's really different when it's all on your shoulders, all of it. and you don't have someone to talk to about it.
I said, okay, two things for me. I want to make sure Bob's happy, and I want to make sure he's stress-free. And really, Insight has done both of those things.
I have looked in quite a few major cities. Nobody has anything like this. We've pretty much decided to stay in this area mainly because you all are here. And you provide us with more than we can ask for.
Insight seemed to offer something that was exactly what we're looking for, and be able to help her maintain the cognitive condition that she already had without losing it faster.
He really feels that there's a meaning to his day, you know, there's a reason to get up for his day. What I tell people is it makes him happy. He loves to be here. It has brought out the best in him, and that, to me, that's the bottom line.
She's here with other people. She's very active. I understand she's the life of the party here. And she's happy.
It's been really nice for him. He comes here, he's stimulated, he's still very social, he's making friends. It's been good for him.
I suspect that as Bonnie's disease progresses, Insight will become more and more important to us as a place for her to be safe and sound and feel secure.
According to his neurologist, because Bob asks this question every time we go to see him, why do I need to be in this center? And he said, because you're stable, Bob. You are unusually stable, and it's because you're in the center.
He still tells me I don't really need to be there, you know, I'm fine, but I see him laughing and I see him smiling and joking with the staff and dancing and all of that, and I know he's having a good time.
He has really blossomed in the process of being involved in programs here.
How do I say this? I've gotten support I never knew I really needed. I have now a place that as things get worse, which they will, I know that people know me, I know that people know him. I've got my network that's going to help us through these next stages. So quite honestly, that's been the biggest benefit for me, aside from the wonderful people here, of course.
It's such a lovely place to be. It provides emotional, spiritual, and physical nurture. I've never been hugged so much in my life, and that's a good feeling.
It's helped me educate myself, has helped me meet other people that know exactly what I'm going through, has helped me to be a better caregiver.
I know I'm much stronger in my role as a caregiver. I'm much more nurturing as a spouse because of it.
I have a much better and much more clear picture of where we're going, and you know, what we're going to need to do and consider, and the options we have along the way.
It's been a happy journey, and gets better every day. And yesterday was one of the best I've had.